What if the way a man is welcomed into a kingdom through ancient rituals and unexpected cultural gestures could tell us more about global alliances than any headline ever could? Today, you're not just going to hear about Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. You're about to step behind the velvet curtains of diplomacy into a world where every gesture speaks, where tradition becomes strategy, and where scientists and historians alike would be stunned by what truly unfolded. This is not just a political trip, it's a carefully woven performance, and every second of it was designed to send shockwaves across the world. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change the way you see power, culture, and influence forever. 2025, for his first international trip as the President of the United States, the scene that unfolded was not one of ordinary diplomatic protocol. It was a theatrical expression of ancient tradition, calculated political messaging, and a meticulously choreographed spectacle of reverence. It is important to remember that nations rarely act without purpose, especially when under the watchful lens of global media. In this case, the Saudi monarchy rolled out not just a red carpet, but centuries of royal symbolism. Trump's reception at King Khalid International Airport in Riyadh was marked by the presence of King Salman himself, a gesture reserved for only the most significant of dignitaries. A military band played, soldiers stood in crisp formations, and jets soared overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue colors echoing the American flag. For the untrained eye, these may seem like cosmetic gestures. For the eyes trained in the historic and ceremonial codes of the Arab world, this was a public performance of honor that few receive. The sword dance, or arda, that followed later in the day was even more telling. Trump was invited to join the traditional Saudi men's dance, a ritual that traces its roots back to the days of tribal warfare and solidarity. Holding a golden-hilted sword flanked by Saudi royals, Trump swayed slightly to the rhythmic beat of drums and chants. Perhaps awkwardly, yet significantly, this was not merely a tourist welcome. It was symbolic inclusion in a brotherhood, a warrior's gesture of alignment. In Saudi custom, to be handed a sword in Arda is to be welcomed not just as a guest, but as a participant in the narrative of strength and shared vision. There are two ways one could interpret such a gesture. The cynic might say it was all for show, staged for global cameras to soften Trump's image and reinforce the kingdom's regional clout. But the thoughtful observer might see something more layered, a strategic opening of arms wrapped in the ancient language of ritual. In a land where honor is often expressed through gesture more than word, where poetry and tradition stand beside political doctrine, such a welcome speaks volumes more than any press release. One cannot separate the moment from its history. The Saudi royal family understands that power is not just about oil reserves and military strength, but about perception, myth, and memory. To publicly welcome an American president with such grandeur was to send a message not only to Washington, but to Tehran, to Cairo, to Moscow, to Beijing. The message was clear. The kingdom is still the center of gravity in the Arab world, still capable of shaping the stage upon which great powers perform. Moreover, this welcome was not merely an act of hospitality, it was a calculated piece of choreography designed to set a new tone. It was in part a reset button. The relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia had seen strains during the Obama years, particularly over the Iran nuclear deal and the kingdom's concerns about waning American presence in the Gulf. Trump's visit, marked with such ceremonial intensity, was meant to signify a new chapter, or rather, a return to an older one defined by strategic alliance, mutual economic interests, and military collaboration. The visual grandeur of the welcome was thus not superficial. It was a symbolic script. This is the renewal of vows. The involvement of the Saudi royal family at every level of Trump's reception also revealed a great deal about their internal narrative. By showing unity, opulence, and confidence, The House of Saud was also displaying strength to its own people. In societies where the monarch's legitimacy is partially drawn from religious and cultural symbolism, such displays reaffirm not just internal relations but internal cohesion. The very act of the king personally welcoming Trump becomes a mirror held up to the kingdom's citizens, reflecting a narrative of unshakable sovereignty, global relevance, and divine blessing. Every movement, every smile, every beat of the drum told a story, one older than the United States itself. Interestingly, the choice of clothing and protocol also played a role in this grand performance. Trump wore a conservative, dark suit, standing in contrast yet respectful harmony with the white tobe and red checkered gutra of the Saudi hosts. The interplay of dress was not a small matter. It was a visual dialogue between East and West. No headscarves were worn by Melania or Ivanka Trump, yet no public rebuke followed. This too was part of the unspoken script. While local women are required to adhere to strict dress codes, the exemption granted to foreign dignitaries, particularly from the US, demonstrated a controlled flexibility. It communicated, we hold our values, but we understand diplomacy. Again, the message was directed at multiple audiences, each parsing it according to their own political and ideological lenses. Security arrangements for Trump's visit further elevated the aura of importance surrounding his arrival. Streets in Riyadh were cleared and lined with Saudi and American flags. Portraits of Trump and King Salman adorned major thoroughfares. In a kingdom where such public displays are rare and tightly controlled, this visual saturation of Trump's image was both unusual and meaningful. It is as though the Saudi leadership temporarily rearranged the nation's visual language to accommodate and exalt their guest. Such gestures do not happen without deep intentionality. In monarchies, pageantry is power. And in this context, the power was shared, if only for a moment. In the halls of academia, such receptions are studied not merely as political events, but as anthropological and psychological phenomena. The sheer scale and symbolism of the welcome invite questions about the role of ritual in diplomacy. Does such a reception create real shifts in perception? Can a dance, a gift, or a ceremonial sword alter the trajectory of geopolitical negotiations? Scholars of behavioral science might say yes. They would point to research on reciprocity, emotional priming, and the power of collective rhythm to forge bonds. When a leader is immersed in foreign customs, treated with exaggerated respect, and surrounded by ancient symbols of honor, his cognitive map of that place and people changes. He begins to associate them with familiarity, safety, even fraternity. This is no accident. Nations like Saudi Arabia understand these principles not through laboratory study, but through generations of tribal politics and Bedouin diplomacy. And so we must not reduce the moment to mere spectacle. Yes, it was a show, but it was a show with stakes. The kingdom risked criticism both abroad and within for its openness to a controversial Western leader. Trump risked criticism back home for embracing an authoritarian regime. Yet both sides leaned into the performance because the rewards, arms deals, counterterrorism cooperation, investments were too valuable to ignore. Behind the dancers and drummers stood billions of dollars in contracts and a shared interest in containing Iran's regional ambitions. If one examines the sequence of events carefully, one will find that the welcome was also the stage setter for what followed. The signing of a $110 billion zero-cents arms deal, the announcement of a counter-extremism center, and several economic pacts. The reception was not just an overture, it was the argument itself. By starting with ritual, the Saudis reminded Trump of a time when honor and allegiance were forged not just in documents but in gesture. And Trump, known for his love of grandeur and public admiration, was an eager participant in this ceremonial dance. All of this is to say that Donald Trump's welcome in Saudi Arabia was neither random nor excessive. It was precise, ancient, and strategic. It was both a mirror and a mask. A mirror reflecting the kingdom's enduring role as a regional leader, and a mask, concealing the deeper calculations of power politics. Every ribbon cut, every drumbeat struck, every sword raised was part of a much older rhythm, one that plays not in the ears, but in the instincts of men who know that in diplomacy, the dance is often as important as the deal. Saudi Arabia is a country known for its strict adherence to Islamic customs, particularly in matters of public morality and gender roles. One of the most visible expressions of this adherence is the dress code for women. Saudi law traditionally mandates that women wear an abaya, a long, loose black cloak, when in public. And many are also expected to cover their hair with a headscarf or even their face with a niqab. For decades, this norm has been regarded not only as a legal requirement, but as a cultural expectation deeply rooted in both religious and social values. However, when foreign dignitaries, especially Western women, visit the kingdom, a curious exception often takes place. The case of Melania Trump and Ivanka Trump during Donald Trump's 2017 visit to Saudi Arabia provides a clear example of this contrast and the flexibility that lies within rigid structures when diplomatic image and international perception are at stake. Upon their arrival in Riyadh, both Melania and Ivanka were dressed modestly but did not wear headscarves. This sparked global media interest, as previous visits by women in high-profile positions had led to similar discussions. The choice not to wear a headscarf was interpreted by some as a statement of autonomy or cultural assertion, while others viewed it as a calculated diplomatic move. What was most striking, however, was that the Saudi government made no public comment or criticism regarding their attire. This silence speaks volumes. It revealed an unwritten understanding between the kingdom and its Western allies, that the strict codes which govern local life may not apply equally to honored guests, particularly those who represent powerful nations. This exemption is not entirely new. Other Western women, including Hillary Clinton, Theresa May, and Angela Merkel, have visited Saudi Arabia without wearing the headscarf. The pattern indicates a soft boundary, an unspoken diplomatic allowance that balances between internal expectations and international relations. It exposes an inherent tension between the kingdom's desire to uphold its conservative image domestically while presenting a more adaptable face to the world. By not enforcing the dress code on Melania and Ivanka, Saudi leadership signaled a strategic tolerance, one that aims to avoid unnecessary diplomatic friction while subtly reinforcing their own authority to selectively interpret tradition. The moment also created a powerful visual dichotomy. On one side were Saudi women, subject to legal and social codes that governed their appearance. On the other were two high-profile American women walking freely without the symbolic constraints of the abaya or headscarf. This contrast did not go unnoticed, and it stirred conversation both within the kingdom and abroad. Some critics pointed out the perceived double standard, questioning why foreign women could forego the veil while Saudi women could not. Supporters of the status quo saw it as an example of respectful diplomacy and hospitality. Either way, the incident underscored the complex dance between tradition, perception, and political strategy. It illustrated that cultural expectations, even in the most rigid systems, can be adjusted, not abandoned, but recalibrated when power dynamics and international image are in play. In reflecting on how Donald Trump was welcomed in Saudi Arabia, we see far more than ceremonial pomp or diplomatic ritual. We see a masterclass in symbolic politics, cultural theater, and the deep currents of tradition that still shape the most modern of statecraft. From the golden swords and rhythmic chants of the Arda to the unspoken flexibility in dress code for foreign women. Every gesture spoke with layered meaning. What appeared as a glamorous welcome was, in truth, a precisely orchestrated message to the world that alliances, power, and perception are built not just in conference rooms, but in the echo of drums, the softness of hospitality, and the ancient codes of honor. Scientists, anthropologists, and observers alike would be right to be astonished. For here was diplomacy not merely practiced, but performed. and performed with an artistry that few nations can rival. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your curiosity. May your mind remain sharp, your questions stay bold, and your journey toward truth continue with clarity and courage. Good luck, and may wisdom guide every step you take.